The Raphinha transfer saga is finally over. It's been rumbling on all summer, but finally Leeds and Barcelona have agreed on a fee of £50 million plus 5 million add-ons to take the Brazilian to the Camp Nou. Everyone knows all about Barcelona's problems this summer in terms of the amount of money that they can spend. So the big question on everyone's lips is Raphinha going to be worth £50 million to Barcelona? Raphinha is a wide forward. He likes to play on the right-hand side, but he is left-footed, so he can cut inside on his stronger foot and generate goals from a more central space. You can also play him as a more traditional left-sided winger if you want to as well. Fans of the Premier League will know a lot about Raphinha already. He's been in the league for 2 seasons now with Leeds United. Those 2 seasons were actually very, very different. The first one was a 9th place finish with Marcelo Bielsa, getting Leeds promoted into the league and having a great season. Leeds playing really intense, direct, attacking football. In the second season, everything went wrong. Leeds barely avoided relegation and Marcelo Bielsa ended up being sacked that season. But actually the really interesting thing as far as Raphinha is concerned is if you look at his numbers, those numbers remain fairly consistent through both seasons. So on the board in front of me here, we've got the data from the last 2 seasons of Leeds United showing Raphinha's attacking numbers. And everywhere you can see an orange box, that means Raphinha has done better in that season. As you can see just on a cursory glance, there's orange on both sides, so you can't tell from the data itself which season was the better season for Leeds. And if we actually drill down into some of the data, it's really quite interesting. There's a lot of things where there's actual close parity on almost all of the numbers. So goals, very, very close here, like almost indistinguishable. Actually, in terms of the expected goals, the underlying numbers there, Raphinha producing more expected goals last season, in the season where Leeds United were not as good. Again, shots comparable. Assists, now here there's a big discrepancy. 0.34 assists in the first season back for Leeds in the Premier League for Raphinha, and only 0.09. But again, if we dig into the underlying numbers, the expected assists here, 0.3, and in the 21-22 season, 0.26. So again, much closer than you might have expected. And then everywhere else, just parity all the way down. Now, in order to explain this phenomenon of why Leeds got worse but Raphinha still stayed good, let's just go to the tactics board for a moment. So we've got on the board here the Leeds team as Marcelo Bielsa played them in the first season that he had in the Premier League. Raphinha here in the wide right area. And what you need to notice about a Bielsa team is that he's going to try and get his wingers as far apart as possible, both hugging the touchline. And they do this in order to do what we call pinning the fullbacks. Now, if Raphinha is here, that fullback is going to be pulled across. If Harrison is here, that fullback is going to be pulled across. And what this does is it just generates space in the back line that teammates can then attack and exploit. The other thing that this does is this allows Raphinha to do some of the things that he's better at, which is getting into these 1v1 situations against fullbacks. And because he's so good on both feet, he can either go down the line or he can cut inside as well. So this really exacerbates one of the main skill sets that Raphinha has. But it's not just a lateral pinning of fullbacks that we see with Raphinha at Leeds. We also see a bit more of a vertical one as well. So what we're going to see in build-up is Raphinha dropping deep and pulling his fullback with him on the way. Now, this is because what Marcelo Bielsa is wanting to try and do is generate space in this area for Raphinha to then run into. So by pulling the fullback away, Raphinha can then be involved in the build-up and then run into this space here, and then hopefully generate these sorts of crossfield balls, cutbacks into the box, which are really dangerous. So what happens is, ball goes out to the centre-backs, they play it around, and we do a little bit of build-up to get the ball to the fullback. And what usually happens here is we'll see the ball into Raphinha, Raphinha playing the bump pass straight into Dallas playing the ball down the line, and then this pass, this run being made here so that Raphinha can get into that area. Another thing that he can do is he can pick the ball up here, and instead of playing build-up and getting into a wide area, he can actually drive into the middle, get into this situation. Then with the ball, he could play Bamford through, or another thing he loves to do is just get on the edge of the box here and play these sorts of shots, bending shots into the far corner of the goal like that. So the question is, where did it all go wrong for Leeds last season? Now, we've already talked about how Leeds like to build up in those wide areas. They like to get Raphinha into the byline and playing these cutbacks into his teammates or coming inside as well. And this all relies on Leeds having good build-up play. So if they can move the ball, they can manipulate the ball around in these areas, then they're going to be able to get Raphinha into those spaces. The problem is that teams became a little bit more wise to Leeds' approach. Leeds also had a huge injury crisis as well. And this meant that the build-up play that Bielsa had instituted in the first season just didn't work in the second season. And so what we start seeing in the second season is this. So the ball's being played by centre-backs down into the channels for Raphinha to run onto, or even balls being played into the striker, being knocked down, and then Raphinha being able to come into more central spaces as well. Much less build-up, but much more transitional elements to the game. So the game goes backwards and forwards a lot more. And in those sorts of games, Raphinha is going to be good too. This shows up really nicely in the data. So on the board in front of me, I've got a couple of heat maps from the 2 seasons that Leeds were in the Premier League, and they show all the areas where Raphinha is receiving progressive passes. So in the first season, we've got 2 areas which really stand out. The first one is this red area here. This is when Raphinha is dropping in to pick the ball up to engage in build-up in this area. And then he can play it to a teammate and get into the byline area here and play those cutbacks across. So that shows up really nicely in the data. Things change a little bit in the following season. We're seeing much less red area here, so there's much less build-up play being done. And actually this red area that's further forward has moved back from the edge of the penalty area outside the penalty area here. So what we're seeing now is those balls being played into the channel from his teammates, the game becoming much more transitional. And there's also a much higher heat spot here in the central space, which suggests that Raphinha is being a lot more direct, and that's what we saw last season. So what does this tell us about Raphinha? Well, in the first season that Leeds are back in the Premier League, the system's working really well, and Raphinha is working in the system. And that's great. It tells us that Raphinha is a system player. You can fit him into a system and he'll do the things that a manager wants to do. In the second season, he becomes more of a moments player. He uses the ability that he has on the ball and his just unique footballing talent to be able to produce moments that allow Leeds to drag themselves out of the relegation battle. And I think both of these areas are actually going to be quite useful for Barcelona. And that bears itself out in the data. So if we look at the pizza charts here, in 2021, Raphinha's pizza chart, you can see a huge spread of blue here. That's his attacking productivity. You can see that he's generating a huge amount of XG for his team. He's got a huge amount of shot volume as well. In the second season, we can see that level of blue just dropping right down. That's obviously because Leeds aren't doing as well. But there's certain signs that actually Raphinha is doing similar things. His progressive passing still really high, and his carry and dribble volume is there too. So you can see that Raphinha in those individual moments is still generating a huge amount for his team. One thing to focus on just before we leave is the amount of red here. So this is the defensive numbers. And Raphinha is an attractive proposition for a team like Barcelona because not only does he give you a huge amount of goal production, but he also does a lot of the hard work off the ball as well. So on the tactics board then, we've got the Barcelona setup. It's exactly the same setup that Leeds have. You've got Raphinha here now in that wide right position. Xavi, the Barcelona manager, is going to try and do the same thing that Bielsa did, which is use his wide players in a really wide configuration, get them hugging the touchline, and what he's going to do is try and spread that back line so players can find space in the middle. Raphinha is going to try and get isolated 1v1 against fullbacks, and as we've said, he can go either way. He can get down to the line and cut back for his teammates, or he can cut inside and make those curling shots as well. So this is the same kind of system that Raphinha has proven himself to be in. And there's an issue of scalability here as well. We saw on the pizza chart that when Raphinha was playing in the system, his numbers improved. And Barcelona will be feeling that if they can do the same, bring Raphinha into a team which has much better players, that scalability factor will come into play as well. But it's not just simply the system player, I think, that Barcelona are going to be interested in. We've already talked about Raphinha last season being more of a moments player, generating goals and chances just through his sheer talent. And I think that's an important aspect for Barcelona as well, because they're going to want to make waves in the Champions League too. We've just seen Real Madrid get through the whole tournament and win the tournament using players who have these moments, this ability to generate something out of nothing. And Raphinha will really offer that for Barcelona as well. So when we're asking the question, is Raphinha going to be worth £50 million to Barcelona? For me, the answer is yes. They're going to get a player who in their system is going to raise them another level. They're going to do well in the league, which is where systems work the best. But also in the Champions League, they've got a really fantastic, talented moments player who's going to be able to make the difference between them in the later stages of the Champions League.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is where the Ralph Rangnick to Manchester United story broke, where a team of journalists have provided unrivaled coverage of Newcastle United's new ownership, and where dedicated writers cover every Premier League team no matter their place in the table. And you can try it free now for 30 days.